Welcome to Who We Remember. I'm Jamie Younger, the founder of StoryKeep and your host for this podcast. In each episode, I ask my guests a seminal question. Whose life story from your own family would you most want to see documented on film? My guests share stories of both living and deceased family members, revealing the remarkable lives that have shaped their own. This show is an extension of our mission at StoryKeep, where we partner with families of wealth to preserve their histories through legacy films and private podcasts. Since 2010, we've had the privilege of working with over 100 families, capturing their unique narratives for future generations. In this podcast, I engage in meaningful conversations with fascinating people, exploring the surprising histories and significant stories of their loved ones. By delving into their particular histories, we uncover universal themes that resonate with all of us. We often wait too long to capture the stories of those that we love. Through these conversations, we elevate, honor, and celebrate the enduring influence of one person's life. My hope is that you'll leave each episode inspired to think more deeply about your own story and the legacy that you want to create. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Jennifer East to the show. Jennifer is based in Malta, but she is originally from Canada, which I suspect will come up quite a lot in our conversation today about her father, Maury East. Maury was a World War II bomber pilot, wilderness resort operator, and outdoor experience innovator. Maury grew up thinking that his mother had abandoned him. He was a deeply sensitive person who was never given the tools to process big emotions. Despite, and maybe because of, all those challenges, he wrote 4 books about his life story. Before we dive into Maury's story, let me introduce you to his daughter. Jennifer East is the founder of Onida Family Advisors. She is passionate about helping global families transition wealth, businesses, and the values that drive their success. She believes that understanding the human dynamic, that is, what happens within us and between us, makes everything else possible. Jennifer began her professional journey as a rising generation leader in her own family business and now guides clients to improve family dynamics, integrate diverse cultural influences, and strengthen family governance practices. She also inspires the rising generation, women, and sibling cousin teams to thrive through personal leadership and development. Taking after her dad, Jennifer adopted a powerful personality, habits, and beliefs. Apparently, Jennifer's kindergarten teacher reported that by the end of the year, she had finally stopped telling the other children in the class what to do. She tells me that it was only when she became a young adult that she realized that she could and should chart her own course. I'm really excited to introduce you to Jennifer East in this way and explore the life and legacy of her dad, Maury. Let's dive in. So, Jennifer, it's really, really wonderful to sit with you and have you on Who We Remember. So thanks for joining me.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I have to say I was really delighted to learn a little bit about the person that you chose to talk about today. And I just wanted to sort of at the top hear from you what went through your mind when I said, okay, who from your own family, whose life story from your own family would you want to have documented on film? What went on in your mind and how did you land on your dad?
Well, that's a good question. It came to mind immediately, I think in part because there are a lot of mysteries in my father's life, especially in his early life. And I did talk to him about it throughout his life to a degree, but it always felt like there was a lot more to understand. And I kind of wonder if this type of process would have helped even him kind of process some of what he wasn't sure about or some of the emotions around those mysteries. So that's why he came to mind for sure.
So your dad was Maury East, and he was, I read that he was born in 1932. Did I get that date right?
1924.
24. Okay.
Yeah.
And in Canada is where he grew up.
in the UK, actually.
UK.
This is part of the curiosity of his life.
Please.
He was born in the UK. And then as an infant, an older infant, he and his mother traveled by ship to the US, where he grew up. And then he subsequently joined the Royal Canadian Air Force during World War II, and then spent the majority of his life in Canada. So he had a sort of curious journey.
Yeah, yeah. So there are many sort of incredible aspects to his life. And I wonder, you shared that he had written several books about his life. And so I assume you've read one or all of those books. And what is the essence of what you would want to get from documenting his life story that you didn't find in those books?
Well, again, I think it's more of what was going on in his mind at all of these different junctures. You know, his books, it's essentially several chapters of one book. And unfortunately, he didn't finish his life story. We're hoping that my mom will continue that process. But what he talked a lot about in the book was very much about what happened. And what I'm interested in is how did that matter? What was the impact? What were his emotional reactions? Because a lot of it was pretty supercharged emotional stuff, and he didn't necessarily delve into that, as one doesn't as a member of the greatest generation. And on paper about your book, in fact, several people said, we want to hear more about what you and your thinking and what was going on in your mind. So that's what I would love to have captured on film.
Yeah, drawing out his interior landscape a little bit more. Right. How do you think he would have responded to you sort of proposing this while he was living? What would his... Good. What do you think he would have said?
He was a pretty formidable person who initially sometimes would say no or would maybe protest, but over time I suspect he would really get into it. I mean, this is a person who chose to write hundreds and hundreds of pages about his own life, and I don't think I ever knew exactly why he did that. But I'm pretty sure it's because he recognized there was a lot to dig into, and that I think he would have risen to the occasion and had some fun with it for sure.
Yeah. Well, from everything I've learned, just the bit that you shared with me, I was like, wow, I would have loved to have sat down with him and talked about these things. If you could, can you tell about what you know of the story of his birth and his mom and kind of his, I guess it would probably be like a lifelong journey of trying to understand his origins and kind of his sort of, I guess, complicated relationship somehow with his mom.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was an intriguing journey, and in fact, not just him, but other relatives, some of whom we're still in touch with, have also tried to help understand what happened. So his mother married, and his father moved to the northeastern U.S. While his mother was pregnant, and at some point she got on a ship and went with infant Maury, and for whatever reasons, and no one knows precisely, she left and went back to England without him. And he was then taken care of initially by his grandmother and some aunts, and then taken care of by a German family on Long Island, and they were about to officially adopt him when his grandmother got on the train and said, no one's going to adopt my grandson, and got him, and then ultimately raised him where his father came in and out of the house. I don't think his father was a particularly reliable guy. So he was raised, unfortunately, to believe that his mother had abandoned him in the U.S. and was dead, which he, I think, didn't believe, and of course then didn't feel very good as a young boy, and then even a young man, and even a older man. So when he joined the Royal Canadian Air Force and was stationed in the UK during World War II, he had the address where he knew he was born, in a small town in Cheshire. He traveled to that town on his first 3-day leave, and he knocked on the door of the house that he hoped was his grandmother's home. This young, handsome, Royal Canadian Air Force pilot, and that was the beginning of his journey to find either his mother or other family members. So that was the beginning of it, a determination to make a connection with his past, with the other side of his family, since he had been raised by his father's side of the family.
And did he come to a satisfying conclusion to that story for himself?
I don't know entirely, but I would say probably not. As I say, some of these other family members have done research. So, for example, his mother, her mother sold a war bond so that his mother could travel back to the U.S. to try to find him at some point. When he was still a young boy, she came back without him. So there are pieces that tell him that this wasn't something that necessarily she wanted to do. Mm-hmm. No, it was just about before the Great Depression, and there was war. These were very difficult times. So he didn't know. I know that over time, he met her when he was in the UK during the war. Mm. According to his book, she had a very emotional reaction, my long lost son, but she was a total stranger to him. So it was, I think, harder for him to have an instant connection with someone whom he certainly felt abandoned by, and his upbringing with his grandmother on the other side of the family wasn't exactly a cheery, happy scene. So there was it was a sadness, I think, that he carried with him for a long time.
Mm-hmm. It seems like you have a lot of respect for him, and you hold him dear, and that you share a lot of his personality traits. And I'm wondering how you sort of saw maybe that early part of his childhood play out and who he would later become and who you knew as a dad.
Well, it's a good question. He was a man determined to overcome whatever came along, and he overcame a lot of things. And I would say the greatest obstacle that he overcame was that he had this very strange beginning to his life. So he was a person who had certain limits, I would say emotional limits, because of that upbringing. And not only because he didn't have his mother, but he was raised during the Great Depression. I think he was told that if only you weren't in our household, we'd have more money to go around. So, he really was not given a solid emotional base. So with that in mind, he accomplished great things, not just in his entrepreneurial activities, and he was a sort of serial entrepreneur, but also he did his very best. I remember in a conversation with him once, he said, "I'm sorry, I'm really not capable of having this conversation." So that really is a clue to a man who understood, I don't have the emotional equipment here to handle this rather challenging conversation, and he was open about it. He wasn't always great at it, of course, but I think that was his way of saying, I'm doing my best, but sorry, I just can't go any further down this path. So I do admire that. It wasn't always easy because he struggled, and as a result, we struggled with him, but he put his shoulder into it and leaned in for sure.
When you sort of look back at being raised, his daughter, what memories and experiences with him stand out that are beloved by you? What memories do you cherish of him?
Well, one thing that comes to mind, I'm not sure I'd use the word cherish, but in retrospect, it's very powerful that every morning, for years and years, he would get up every day at 5:30 and he would go running. And then when he became of an age where he couldn't no longer run, he would go walking. And, for quite a long way. And at the end of the summer, if it had been a dry season, he would sometimes run into a black bear on the road. So he started carrying bear spray with him. So just to give you a context, this is a very determined man. And at the time, as a child, I always thought, my dad is weird. Why does he do this every day? But of course, it's a powerful lesson that I now use in my own life of personal, taking care of oneself, of commitment to daily habits. And I'm hoping to pass that on to my kids. So it's one of these examples where he lived his life in a certain way, and it rubbed off in a powerful sense for me. So that's something that comes to mind as a very Maury-like story.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned that is a story that I guess you don't know that much of, but you would want to know more about, is how he sort of had this courage to join the Canadian Air Force. Why is that intriguing to you? What do you know about that part of his life, and what parts don't you know?
I know that he was determined to fly. That's what his passion was. He didn't have any experience. He'd never been on an airplane, but when wartime came, he was in the U.S. as a non-U.S. citizen. He was about to be drafted into the American Army, which he definitely didn't want to do. He had a British passport only. So he literally picked up a backpack, walked across the Peace Bridge in the middle of the winter and knocked on the door of the Canadian Air Force registry office and signed up, and then rose up and became top of his class and became a pilot of Wellington bombers. So I know that his determination to, again, overcome odds and just sort of march into the cold, dark winter and just say, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it. So I don't know where his passion for flying came from, but certainly it continued throughout his life. He not only, he worked after the war in the Air Force and then got into the resort business and flew seaplanes and started an air charter service and a number of aviation oriented. So this was really passionate, a real passion for him. He was also a volunteer with the Volunteer Search and Rescue later in life. And so those are the things I know. So it was not only wanting to avoid conscription to the Army, but it was also just this determination that the air was the place for him.
Yeah. So I don't know about this peace bridge between the U.S. and Canada. Can you tell me a bit about that?
I'm not sure that I know that much about it either. He was living in Buffalo at the time, and he probably got himself by bus to the bridge and then walked over. And I mean, he obviously was not particularly well established in the home he was living in.
No,
not an easy place. So getting away from there was, I think, part of his goal as well. But it was his ticket to a Commonwealth country that would enable him, he hoped. I don't know how we would have known that they would take a British citizen. So it was simply his thoroughfare to this new adventure.
A new moment in his life starting. Yeah. It's funny. I find so much that sometimes in talking to people about their life stories, I'll make the assumption like, oh, how did you have the courage to do that? And the person will say, courage? What are you talking about? I just wanted to get out of there. Like it didn't feel courageous in the moment. So it would be really interesting to have had the opportunity to sit with him and ask him, like as you've shared, how he felt in that moment. If he felt that it was a big sort of courageous act on his part to, leave and sign up, or if for him it was just, an exciting adventure and he didn't feel any fear at all. I would love to have asked.
That was also a time in the world where, between the Depression and then the war, people were not living lives of great choice. They simply had to go and do, and this was something that he wanted to do, and it was going to avoid a negative outcome. I probably, there wasn't a lot more to it than that, and clearly he had a lot of courage and a sense of adventure, which was a huge part of his makeup. So others may not have seen it. Others may have been daunted by the idea, but for him, he just got on with it and found himself on the train to the first training facility for the Air Force. So,
yeah. So, do you know much about him leaving the Air Force and then starting and becoming an entrepreneur?
Well, he married into a resort-owning family. So my half-brother's mother, not my mom, but their mother, her family was in the resort business, and it was 1948. He had nowhere to go for Christmas, and one of the other guys in the Royal Canadian Air Force office said, well, why don't you go up to this place called Limberlost, a couple hours north of Toronto, which he did. He met the daughter, and so then he married into, he was the in-law in the family business arena. So that's how he started on the journey in probably 49, and he was in the resort business till 2015. So a very long journey.
Wow. You shared a little bit with me that one of the curiosities that you had was how he and your mother dealt with hard times as entrepreneurs, and being a business owner myself, I can completely relate with that interest, right? Of like how did you do it? And so did you have a sense as a kid that they were struggling at certain points, in running a business or, expanding? What brings that curiosity up for you?
Well, some of it's simply the facts of all of the various different businesses that he either started or they worked on together. So it's a long list, and it creates curiosity about, well, how on earth did you come up with some of these ideas and pursue them and do them all at once? So that's one part. But to answer your question, yes, very much we were aware. And I was, my brothers are quite a bit older. So when I was born, it was just myself and then my younger sister. So as the sort of eldest of that second family, I felt I aligned very closely with them in the business and listened and heard a lot about what was going on. So yes, I was keenly aware that it wasn't always rosy. And also then I began working in the business at a young age, as all of my siblings did as well. Mm-hmm. So it was a big part of our daily life. The kitchen table, running of a business at a kitchen table, I grew up with that experience profoundly. Mm-hmm. And of course, learned lots of lessons that I now apply in my work with family enterprises, the good and the bad and some of the ugly of those experiences.
Yeah. So what do you think you would want to ask him about that?
I would want to ask him, again, it comes back to this word of courage and adventure. How did you imagine that you would, I'll give you an example of one of the stories. They were running a resort in Muskoka, which is a couple of hours north of Toronto, kind of a lake district. And my father saw a little tiny ad about this big in the Globe and Mail newspaper for a private resort that was for sale in a place called Killarney, Ontario. So he got in his seaplane, he flew up, fell in love with the area and decided to take on this second business, 3-hour drive from the first one, in a resort that had no history of being a business. It was run as a private entertainment center for the clients of a big American trucking company. So it had no business history. There had been no road access. The road was just being constructed. So no one had ever been to this community other than by water. So my question would be, what would possess you to think that this was a situation that you could make work? And of course, they were there for 53 years. That's where I grew up, the business I grew up in. So it flourished, and, with its bumps along the way, of course. But what would go on in your mind? It's one thing to be excited about a new, not only entrepreneurial venture, but a new area and truly a new adventure. But how is it that you thought that you could make all of this happen simultaneously? So that would be my main question for him and for my mother, who was, of course, they were an absolute partnership. It wasn't just him. It was the two of them side by side for all those years.
And if it came to pass that we had both your parents sitting in front of the camera together and sort of having the opportunity to see their dynamic as spouses and as business owners together, how do you suspect that would play out? Were they sort of the sweet couple that finished each other's sentences? Would they poke at each other? Would they say, no, that's not how the story went? What was their dynamic?
Well, I remember an MP who came to celebrate when my father won an award. He said, "Your father is the horse and your mother is the reins." So that was his perception of their relationship. So I think to a degree that would play out in a conversation, that he would be all fired up and tell all these great stories, and she, in a quiet way, might say, "Well, that's not exactly how it was, Maury," but I would say as they aged and worked together over time, especially near the end, they sold the resort when my dad was 91. My mother was quite a bit younger. So by that time, she was very much in the lead position in the business. So that dynamic in front of the camera would have changed and probably softened a bit to a more of a true kind of partnership on camera, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Turning just a little bit here now, you worked in your family's businesses. You now advise families who are in business and also maybe who have finished the operation of the business but are still working together as a family. What inspiration and and qualities of your father do you find in yourself and maybe are still trying to nurture in yourself, or maybe tamp down, depending on what it is? What, if you sort of maybe don't reflect on this too much, but what would you say those qualities are for you?
Well, I do go back to the word adventure, but I see it as a dual. So there's an external adventure that I myself, and even in my work with families, take families on. And there's an internal adventure, which is the having the courage to explore more challenging internal dynamics, family history, the dynamics that exist around the table. But both require a sense of courage and adventure to be able to take them on. And so I would say that's the thing. I feel like my dad took his internal adventure to the place where the limit of where he could pursue it. And I do feel like that torch, whether he did it intentionally or not, that I've certainly picked it up and have continued that desire to understand the self, the impact, I have on others, and to help other people understand that some of those roadblocks in our way are, in fact, internal and not simply finger pointing to other family members who we perceive to be standing in our way. So that's what I would say is the most powerful legacy.
And because he was, like you said, he was a bush pilot, and he was starting all of these, sort of resort businesses and in the great outdoors. When you say adventure, I mean, we're really talking about, adventure with bears and all kinds of things. And how does that show up in you in your life? Are you also adventuresome in your day-to-day and where you go on vacation and those kind of things? Like, does that kind of resonate with your dad's legacy?
It really does. In fact, his great passion was sailing. And when we were growing up, a few times we had the great privilege of sailing for a few months at a time. During the winter, when our business was closed in the Bahamas, my mother would teach us on board. So an incredible formative experience for my sister and I. And so my husband and I are now doing the same thing with our kids, not during the school year, but we spend a large part of the summer sailing. And again, that sense of adventure, being very connected to the elements and nature and learning that, voyage planning doesn't always work out the way you want it to. So these, in this way, I mean, I do feel like my dad is on board with us at all times, because that's very much where his heart was. Just in closing here, and there, I feel like we could do a whole series. I feel like I'm just getting a taste of your dad here. But if you had the opportunity now, it was not that long ago that he's passed away. It was 2017. Is that right? Yes.
When he passed. So you've had some years to reflect and digest and process his death. What do you think you would want to talk about with him, or ask him, or say to him now with the passage of time? I think that what comes to mind first is something I would say, which is it's okay, Dad. It's all okay. That whatever mystery that remained between you and your mother, because I still think near the end there was still a mystery, it doesn't reflect that anything negatively upon you. You did an incredible 93 years with what you were given, and look at all of us who are continuing on, that it's all okay. I think that's what comes to mind as far as what I would like to say to him. Yeah. What a beautiful thing to gift him, those words. Well, it's really been such a pleasure to get a little taste of your dad, and I actually would just like to continue the conversation about him off record, because he's such an incredible character of so many different sides of him, and I really appreciate you sharing what you did today about your dad, Maury.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's been a wonderful experience, even just for me, to reflect on some of these stories and how they impact and help shape my choices in life. So it's been a wonderful experience from my perspective as well.